Good morning, High Rock Arlington. My name is Josh Throneburg, and I am one of the pastors at High Rock Church in Brookline. And it's wonderful to be worshiping with all of you this morning. And I bring you greetings from High Rock in Brookline. For those of you who aren't familiar, High Rock in Brookline was the second of the High Rock churches, and we just started our 9th year of ministry in Brookline. And there are a few things that we are excited about right now. One is that we are worshiping in a new location. We spent the first 8 years worshiping in the public schools in Brookline. That was great. But just a couple of months ago, we moved into one of the synagogues in town, which is a much better space and a better location, and so we're excited about that. Also, we just sent off one of our pastors, Pastor Yumiko, who many of you know, to serve at Tokyo Life Church. Grant and Miho, the pastors there, are coming back to the States for 6 months and needed someone to kind of lead the church while they were away. And it just so happens that we have Yumiko on our staff. And since she was born and raised in Japan, there are no visa issues, no language issues. She gets super cheap health care. And so we were excited to send her overseas for a year to serve there. We're also in kind of an exciting season in Brookline. One of the things that we do every Christmas season at the church is something called My Christmas 3, where we challenge everyone at our church not just to use the Christmas season to bless the blessed, i.e. buy gifts and spend money on those who already have so much, but to actually extend that giving to the poor in our local community and around the world. And so we break our Christmas spending out in 3 ways: our friends and family, the poor in our local community, and the poor in our world. Locally, most of us give to the Brookline Community Foundation, which administers our community's safety net program. And in the past 3 years, through our Christmas giving and through members of our church finding matching programs through their workplaces, we've raised almost $350,000 for the Brookline Community Foundation. So it's an exciting time of year in our church. And if you've been around the past couple of weeks, you know that during the season of Advent at High Rock, we often do a preacher swap where pastors kind of rotate around to the different churches. And so while Pastor Dave is over in Brookline today, I get to be here worshiping with all of you. And this year, the passage that we are all preaching from is the Annunciation from Luke chapter 1. And my section comes from the end of the Annunciation, after the announcement has been made, when Mary responds to all that she has been told with these simple words: I am the Lord's servant. At this point in the series, most of you are aware of the context of this passage. But for those who may not be, let me just at least set the scene for you a little bit here. As many know, Mary is young, very young. Best estimates place her around 13 years old at this point. And she is promised to be married. She's engaged to a man named Joseph. But as yet, their marriage has not been finalized, and so she's still living in her parents' home until that union is final. Her parents live in Nazareth, which is a small town perched high up on a hill that no one climbs because the town isn't worth climbing to. And so there's Mary, and she's nestled in that small town that no one ever visits or cares about, living a simple life with her parents, doing the basic tasks that a 13-year-old young woman in the home did, preparing food and fetching water and helping with the younger children, basic stuff like that. And all of a sudden, on an otherwise ordinary day, God catches Mary by surprise. With no warning at all, an angel appears to her. We are not told of the details of his arrival. Was she at home? Was she at the well getting water? Maybe bringing home food that she had traded from a neighbor? We aren't told. We get the sense that she is alone. And we're told that the angel greets her with what seems to be a fairly innocuous greeting of, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." And Mary is disturbed by the greeting. Actually, she's more than disturbed. She's greatly troubled, and she wonders what it means. But the angel comforts her, tells her, Mary, Mary, don't be troubled. This is good news. You have found favor with God. You're going to become pregnant. You're going to give birth. And when you do, you're going to name that little boy Jesus, and he is going to be great. He will be called Son of the Most High. He will sit on the throne forever. His kingdom will never end. And Mary, shocked by this announcement, is confused as to how this can happen. And so she asks the angel, how will this be, given that, given that I'm a virgin? The angel calmly tells her, don't worry about that. Holy Spirit will arrive. He will take care of that, as if that would relieve someone. And yet at the end of all that, this young girl standing before an unexpected angel on the slopes of a sleepy town, after being told that she will soon become pregnant, that the baby that grows in her womb will rule the world forever, Mary musters the words, "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." And the angel leaves. Now somebody reads that passage and thinks, wow, what a story, and what a young woman. How fortunate she is because God has favored her. God is going to bless her and make her great. And it's no wonder, because look at her faith. Look at that humble response. I am the Lord's servant. Can you imagine a more perfect response? No wonder God picked her among all the young women in Israel. How blessed she is, how favored she is, that of them all, she is the one chosen by God for this great task. Which is absolutely true. Except that being called into the Lord's service, while a tremendous honor, also comes at tremendous cost. Do me a favor here and play along for just a minute. I want you to imagine that you are a goat living in the days of King Solomon. You are grazing in a pasture owned by a local family, just a day's walk or so from Jerusalem. And one morning, the young family that owns the land that you are living on comes out to the pasture that you're grazing in, which is an extremely rare treat. And you take notice. All the goats take notice. And you overhear the father of the family say to your shepherd, "I'm looking for the finest goat of them all, the best, the purest, the most perfect." The shepherd says, "Okay," and he comes out and he looks around the pasture and he rounds up 8 to 10 of the finest goats in the field, and lo and behold, you are among them. And you're so proud as you're led forward, along with all the others, to be surveyed by your owner. And one by one, taking his time, he examines each goat that's there. And when he gets to you, he lifts up your chin and he checks your eyes and he shakes your legs. And as he finishes, he places his hand on your head and tussles your hair, and you hear him say, "That's a fine goat." And you are overjoyed. And you anxiously watch as he continues down the line, one by one, looking at each goat there until he has finished, and he steps back to take a final look, survey the group. You straighten your back and you lift your head and you look straight into his eye in a way that is confident, not overwhelming and not intimidating, but confident. And eventually he looks back at you, he nods his head, and he says, "That's the one." The other goats are led back to the pasture, but not you. You're special. You're favored. And you've been chosen. And all the other goats in the field envy you, because the owner has called you forward into his service. And they're left to just, graze as usual. How blessed you are. As quickly as you were chosen, you're on the road, the whole family with you, headed to Jerusalem together. By nightfall, you arrive, you get a good night's rest. The next morning, you get an early start. You go to the temple where a man in long robes approaches you, pulls out a knife, pulls it close to your ear, and slides it across your throat. And there you die. Your blood pouring out over the neck, over the altar. The chosen one. How blessed you are. How favored you are to be singled out among the many. For Mary, the call into the Lord's service was a thrilling one. In fact, verses after this, Luke records the song of praise that Mary erupts into in response to this news. Mary sang, "My soul glorifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name." A chapter after this, in Luke chapter 2, we read the amazing story of Jesus' birth. How Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem, and that while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. And 40 days after that blessed night, Joseph and Mary took this beautiful baby boy. They took Jesus up to Jerusalem and to the temple for the purification rites, to present him to the Lord. It would have been a thrilling day for the family. But what Mary doesn't yet see is that she is a goat on her way to Jerusalem. Mary hears the call of this angel as a blessing. And it absolutely is. And she was right that all generations would call her blessed, because we do. But this blessing will come with many curses, and her life will bear the marks of suffering that are all too familiar to servants of the Lord. And God doesn't take long to let her know it's coming. Mary and Joseph's visit to the temple to dedicate Jesus is interrupted by a righteous old man at the temple, a man named Simeon, who had been promised by God that before he died, he would see the Messiah. And that day has come. And when Simeon sees Jesus and his parents approaching, he goes over to them and he took Jesus in his arms and he began praising God that Israel's salvation had arrived. It's this amazing moment as Simeon raises Jesus in his arms and begins prophesying words of joy and thankfulness over him. And Mary must have beamed to hear her baby boy spoken of in this way. But then Simeon ended his prayer and he spoke to Mary. And the tone of his prophecy changed. We read, "The child's father and mother marveled at what was said about him. Then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, 'This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. And a sword will pierce your own soul too.'" Here is a young mother relishing in the joy of her firstborn son, and in the prophetic words about what her son means to the world and to Israel. But just after the prayer, and just after his blessing, this man turns to Mary and tells her, "Your son's life will cause many to rise and many to fall. Some will be exalted by him, others will be broken by him." And then he says directly to her, "And a sword will pierce your soul too." Now, a sword piercing your soul doesn't sound good, but it's actually much worse than it sounds. You can't see it in the English, but the kind of sword referenced here is a long, broad, double-edged sword, i.e., the kind of sword that when thrust into your body drives past the flesh and tears the inside of your body to shreds, causing extreme pain and injury. And that is Simeon's word to Mary here on her day of celebration. Not only will your son suffer, but you are going to suffer too, and painfully. You said you were the Lord's servant. Well, let me tell you what that means for you. It will be for you as if someone took a long, broad, double-edged sword and ran you through with it. You have been chosen, Mary. And that is a blessing. But it is a blessing that is going to cost you. This is a pattern that's not unfamiliar to many of us. Many of you have no doubt experienced it. You're singled out among your class or among your colleagues in your department or in your group. You're chosen for a new program or for a promotion. And it's an honor that you were chosen because you were chosen for a reason, for your performance or for your potential, and it feels great. I remember 10 years ago going to be assessed as a church planter and being told that only 10 to 20% of those that go get the green light to plant a church. And so when the assessment was over and I sat at that table and they gave me the green light, I was proud. I got picked. I was among the chosen. What you don't realize in those moments is that being chosen has costs. You were chosen for that important project, but it means more hours, more pressure, less sleep, less time with your family. You got picked for that promotion, but now you have to travel all the time and you're missing out on the things at home you'd love to be at, or you have to move and leave your friends and family behind. Being picked out of the crowd often feels pretty good, but there's often cost associated with it. And for Mary, she was being called to something amazing. But the cost was high, and her suffering would be great. In part, the suffering was going to be circumstantial, as she, along with Joseph and Jesus, became refugees in Egypt during Herod's purge. But for the most part, her suffering was connected directly to Jesus and to his ministry, to Jesus and his life. There would come a day in his youth, recorded also here in Luke chapter 2, when she and Joseph would head home after Passover. But Jesus would sneak away and stay behind at the temple. And after 3 days of searching, they would find him in the temple courts. And Mary would go up to her young son and pull him aside and chastise him because she has been sick with worry. But Jesus would casually question her anxiety, speak of greater things. And when Jesus first began his public ministry, his words were difficult to accept and to hear. So much so that Mary and the rest of the family became convinced that there may be psychiatric issues at play. To their shame, they went out in public to try and retrieve Jesus, to bring him home and save him and them the embarrassment that he was causing. In a later episode that may be related, Jesus is continuing to do and say some strange things, and Mary and his brothers come to speak with him. When the crowd tells him that they are outside and want to see him, Jesus questions the legitimacy of their relationship as his family, pointing instead to the members of the crowd that he considers his real family sitting before him. I still remember the first time that I have a little girl named Agnes at home. She's 1 year old, and I remember the first time that she rejected me. You know, when they're really little, they just love mom and dad, and every time you're around them, they just want to grab onto you, and other people come and try to hold them, and they kind of push them away. You know, people are unfamiliar. But we got a nanny that was going to help with Agnes, and the nanny started coming, and after a few weeks, there was this day where I came home, you know, and I was hoping that Agnes was going to come to me. I was hoping that when I walked through the door, like usual, her face was going to light up and she was going to reach her arms out, you know, kind of trembling, so excited to get into my arms. Instead, when I got home and I went to get her and to retrieve her, she turned away and turned back to the nanny. I know it's silly, but I died a little inside in that moment. Mary and Jesus' siblings show up to speak with him. And he says to the crowd, who are my mother and my brother and my sisters? You all, these people who sit here. These are devastating pains to a mother. It's one thing when it's a 1 year old. It's another thing when it's a 30-year-old man. Devastating pains for a woman who at one moment wonders if her son is mad and at another moment experiences his direct rejection. We could look at the awkward exchange between the two of them at the wedding, Cana, John chapter 2. Throughout the New Testament, we see in Mary a woman struggling to come to terms with who Jesus is and what he has come to do. She had said so long ago, I am the Lord's servant. But perhaps she had never imagined that being favored by God meant that she would have to endure public humiliation, public rejection from her son. But of course, the worst was yet to come. Because in the end, Mary would endure the greatest pain that any parent or mother can experience. For she would watch as her son was taken into custody, laid bare on the street, beaten in front of her. She would watch as a large wooden beam was placed on his back and as he crumbled under its weight. And she would hear her son's screams as they drove the nails through his ankles and his wrists. If his life and his ministry had caused her to bleed, this was the moment Simeon spoke of. Because when the spear pierced Jesus' side, a sword plunged deep into Mary's soul. She was there when they took him off the cross, there when they laid him in the grave. And we are told that Mary was there among the women who went home to prepare spices for his burial. Can you imagine her sitting in that room, on a stool, opening up a small bag of myrrh to make preparations? Can you imagine when that first whiff of the myrrh wafted below her nose, scent being deeply connected to memory, how her heart and mind were transported back to the beginning, when the wise men arrived and presented it to her as a gift, back when she proudly held this bouncing, beautiful, chubby baby boy in her arms and not the corpse of her firstborn son. I don't think Mary saw this coming. When Gabriel appeared and told her that she would give birth to a son and that this son would be great and that he would rule on the throne of David and reign over Israel and his kingdom would never end, I think she expected something better than this. I don't think that when she packed her bags and hurried to Elizabeth's house to tell her the good news, and when she sang that song of praise to God for blessing her with such an incredible gift, that she is expected to be mixing spices for her dead son's body. For Mary, it was all so unexpected. Oftentimes the things, they start out so well and so new. We're filled with joy and awe and wonder at what God has done for us. He's speaking to us. We feel close to Him. And out of our joy and our gratitude, we sing His praises. We go running down the road to our friends to tell them of the wonderful things that He has done in our lives. But life has a way of dampening our joy and our wonder. Things are harder than we expected them to be. Friendships are harder than I expected. Marriage is harder than I expected. Parenting is harder than I expected. Being single is harder than I expected. My job is harder than I expected. And faith, my connection to God, and even that is harder than I expected it to be. And I think for Mary, this is harder than she thought it would be. And I think that just maybe as she sits in that room mixing and preparing those spices to take to her son's tomb, maybe she thought to herself, I'm going to do what I need to do here, and then it's time to go home. I'm done. And some of us are in that place this morning. Things are harder than we thought they'd be. And right now, we're ready to be done. Whether it's your marriage, or your family, or your job, or maybe your faith and your relationship with God. And if that's where you're at today, I want to encourage you not to walk away. Because it might just be that God has a surprise in store for you, and that He's going to do something unexpected in your life. Because when Mary woke up on that blessed Sunday morning and walked through dawn's dim light to His tomb, she didn't find Jesus' body ready to be tended to. Mary found angels again. God had taken her by surprise when she was 13, when an angel told her that she would become pregnant and give birth to a son, and she asked the angel, how can this be? How is that possible? And now, so many years later, standing before an empty grave, God takes her by surprise again when an angel tells her, you've come looking for your son, you've come looking for Jesus, but He's not here. He has risen from the dead. And Mary had to wonder, how can that be? How is this possible? Just like before, God had done something amazing, something that would change her life forever. And if she had given up hope before, if she was ready to quit and to go home before, well, everything was different now. Mary wasn't done. This was just the beginning. And that's what we find in what happens next. One of the greatest joys of my job is that every week, or most every week, I get to write a sermon, which means that most every week I get to sit down with a text from the Scriptures and dig into it, study it, tear it apart, explore it. And almost every week during that exploration, I find something new, something that I hadn't seen before or thought of before. And my discovery for this sermon has been especially encouraging and exciting because I had never seen it before. I can't believe that I'd never seen it before or I hadn't paid better attention, but I hadn't. And this is it. In the book of Acts, we are given one final glimpse into the life of Mary, and what a glimpse it is. In Luke's second book, the book of Acts, he tells the story of Jesus' ascension. And then we read, then the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the hill called the Mount of Olives, a Sabbath day's journey from the city, walk from the city. When they arrived, they went upstairs to the room where they were staying. Those present were Peter, John, James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas, the son of James. They all joined together constantly in prayer, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. Our last known contact with Mary is in the upper room in Jerusalem, as Jesus' followers prayed and waited for the arrival of the Holy Spirit that Jesus had promised them. Before writing this sermon, I'd never thought of Mary in this way, but she is among those waiting for the gift of the Spirit in the upper room in Jerusalem. But now she's no longer a 13-year-old girl being picked from obscurity out of a town nobody cares about. Now she is the 46-year-old mother of our risen Lord. And after all the ups and downs, all the hurt and the pain of a life spent as the mother of Jesus, here at the end, still she sits and still she says, I am a servant of the Lord. And there in that upper room, for a second time, She waits for the Holy Spirit to fall on her. The first time the Spirit fell on her, she gave birth to a son. The second time, she would help give birth to the church. And so the tested servant waits, so that she too may go out into the streets and bear witness to the good news that the angel told her, that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. It's an amazing image of her there after all the years, after all the hardships, after all that she went through, still ready to be used by God, still a servant of the Lord. I want to end with this. I don't know how closely you might have paid attention to the graphic that was designed for this sermon series by Pastor Travis from High Rock Acton. But when you look at that graphic, it has a pretty positive feel to it. There's an angel in royal robes, Mary humbly seated near a well, and our tagline, unexpected, when God catches you by surprise. And even that tagline has kind of a positive vibe to it, right? Like, oh, a surprise from God, how exciting. But there's one detail that is easily overlooked, and that is the blood-red pitcher that sits before Mary. She's not looking at it in the image. Her eyes are set on the angel and his glorious announcement. But nevertheless, there it sits, silently before her. And she may not know it now, but it is hers to drink from. And I'm sure that many of us have some sense of this, that whatever joy, wonder, and felicity accompanies the opening chapter of our relationship with God, that red pitcher is always there. Being a servant of the Lord isn't easy. Hardships will come. Dark days are bound to settle in. But we have hope, most especially through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, that those dark days do not have the last word. Perhaps Peter said it best when he wrote to fellow Christians, "Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice, inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when His glory is revealed." And so to anyone who is here today and the fiery ordeals of your life feel a little too fiery, and you're giving up on God, or you're giving up on work or marriage, or maybe on life entirely, I invite you to see the surprise of Jesus' resurrection and know that God can do things in your life that you can't even begin to imagine right now. You may have come here today with spices in your hand, ready to lay things to rest and just be done. But when you least expect it, God can catch you by surprise. Amen.